I wanted to share a story that helped me recognize the meaning of community in my life. So recently, after taking an online quiz that asked questions such as, how do I pronounce the word that describes my father's sister, my aunt, of course, what do I call the long sandwich with lots of cold cuts and toppings, a hero, and how do I address a group of people? Of all the choices listed, you all was my favorite option. It was stated that I grew up in the Northeast. Well, in fact, I grew up in a little bit of a gas pier, New Jersey, in a suburb about 10 miles outside New York City. In 5th grade, I became friends with the new girl from Pittsburgh, and her family razzed me to no end about my accent. For some reason, from that time on, it seemed important to me that I would never let people determine where I was from based on how I spoke. Until that time, instead of saying water, I said water. OMG would have been oh my God. And at the time when that time when the sun rises in the beginning of the day, that was dawn. Your pet was a dog, and the thing in your dresser, the drawer you pull out, well, now as I recognize that artists are people who draw, I've since been calling it a drawer. I worked hard to lose any accent I had that could identify me as a Jersey girl, at that time, probably my worst fear. Accents are a small symbol of the cultural differences of our country. If you hear y'all, you might think of the South and whatever image that conjures up in your head. For me, this was a way that I divided myself from the rest of our country. It allowed me to put up a wall and assume that those with accents different than my own somehow wouldn't be like me in ways that mattered. Flash forward to my junior year in college when I was lucky enough to live in Scotland. Now, mind you, Glasgow, Scotland, Glaswegians, have one of probably the toughest accents to understand. I didn't actually know my aunt and uncle who were from Glasgow spoke English until I was about 10, when my brother answered a question they asked at both of us, and I scared dumbfounded, wondering how he knew their language. So let me tell you, while I was living in Scotland, walking down the street, if I heard an accent that was American, holy, these people were like my friends. I was immediately drawn to that person. It didn't matter whether the accent was the Midwest, Boston, New York, the South, what the person speaking that accent looked like. They were American, and now this person somehow seemed like me. They had something in common with me, and I wanted to know more about them, even if we were polar opposites. Somehow, what in the States had been a way to differentiate myself from others became a connection I valued while living outside of the United States. I started to think, what am I missing about people by letting our differences be what I used as a starting point for developing friendships, or avoiding them? Why wasn't I seeing stories, experiences, and the values of people with the accents instead of just hearing the twang, or lack thereof? While I was taken out of my home, away from my family, community, and support systems, those who may never have even visited the state where I spent my first 20 years, those who might never have seemed similar to me back home, I now approached as if they were my siblings. No exaggeration, I would run across the street to meet them. In a country where I was the outsider, suddenly this person's accent, however different it was from mine, represented something I shared with them. What I realized is that somehow, the smaller the community we are in, the more critically we analyze our differences. Here at Derryfield, we sit in the common spaces next to our peers who have so much in common with us, and yet we sometimes focus more on the differences. Like, they play field hockey, I play soccer. They teach humanities, I'm more of a science person. The list goes on. As you start a new school year, all of you, you may remember all the reasons why last year you were friends with certain people, or why you weren't. But somehow, alums seem to say that after graduation and upon returning from college, those reasons often seem trivial and unimportant. Instead, imagine you're traveling thousands of miles from Derryfield. Perhaps you're on another continent, and you look across the way and you see somebody wearing a Derryfield Athletics sweatshirt. Immediately, your mind races. Wow, how is that person associated with Derryfield? What sports do they play? What years were you there? You care, they matter, and somehow a connection can be formed. Let's not miss the chances we have while we sit in close proximity of each other to be with each other, learn from each other, and share fun times together. Don't get me wrong, our differences are important, and our background is a huge part of our identity, but let's value our difference. While we value our differences, let's create a community that welcomes everyone and honors their story for its similarities as well. Thank you.